Hello, everybody. This is my second news update of the day, on the Empowering Democracy show. Thanks, honey. And I'm your host, Joe Firestone. The topic for today is it's the economy, stupid, but blame the corpse. The corporations, of course. So there were two articles in succession by Robert Reich, who are very close to each other. Okay, anyway, that outline his thoughts on the subject, which are quite similar to mine. So I'm going to analyze what he said and most probably expand on it, okay, in various ways. I'll start by sharing the screen. And bringing up the first article. I picked up the first article on reader-supported news. And the second article, okay, on LA Progressive. I think both articles originated at Bob's Substack. I'm fairly sure about that. For some reason, here we go. So let's look at the first of these articles. I'm sorry I didn't have it set up in the way I wanted it first, but here's the reader-supported news article. Anyway, I think that's there. Yes, it is. So, I take it back. I guess the first of these articles was published in The Guardian. Okay, this is on October the 22nd, originally. The title is Democrats Need to Address Economic Fears Now or Risk Losing Their majorities. And here's a quote from somebody to begin with, from Evan Vucci. Now, I guess that's just a photo of Joe Biden. And the quote is probably from Bob Reich. Why aren't the Democrats hammering away with an economic message? And this is in the context of the fact that mostly in the campaign, they've been campaigning on abortion rights, what the Republicans have done to abortion rights and will continue to be doing to abortion rights. And their other big issue has been the danger to democracy from the Republicans. From the MAGA Republicans. They do distinguish between the MAGA Republicans, okay, and other Republicans. The subtitle here is Until Democrats Tell It Like It Is, Their Electoral Majorities Will Continue to Be Fragile. Bob Rice says, a mild diversion of Liz Truss's economically induced vanishing act may be occurring on this side of the Atlantic. Despite the Federal Reserve's most aggressive campaign in generations to slow the economy and bring price increases under control, prices continue to climb. Actually, yes, they do continue to climb, but the rate of the climb, okay, is declining. And various forecasts, from example, Chase Bank, say that in this year, the rate of increase, the velocity, price rises, will decline from the current 8.2% to 6.7%. Okay, and by the end, okay, they say the year after this one, the rate will decline from 6.7% to 3.4%. So the argument is, and now I'm giving you the Chase argument, which is shared by Stephanie Kelton. Okay, that argument says that this declining inflation is already built into the economy because of the actions that already have been taken. So the end of the inflation, of serious inflation anyway, is already built into the economy. The argument is we should not be doing any more now, or we're going to kill the economy. Anyway, Bob Rice says prices rose at a brutally rapid rate in September, pace, I should say, in September, with the key inflation index increasing at the fastest rate in 40 years. For this reason, investors expect the Fed to announce another rate increase at the end of its next meeting on the 2nd of November, just 6 days before Election Day. Republicans are focusing on inflation because voters see it as their biggest immediate problem, and it's easy to pin blame on the Democrats because they're in charge. But the Biden administration and the Democrats aren't responsible. Inflation is worldwide. It is being propelled by continuing global supply shocks, including Putin's war in Ukraine, China's COVID lockdowns, which are contributing to shortages of energy, food, and high-tech components. Okay, it's debatable whether this is Putin's war. Okay, and even if you do consider that, okay, it is Putin's war, it's also debatable whether the war itself, the military war itself, is causing the continuing inflation, or is currently continuing to increase the rate of inflation. And that is because it's clearly the economic sanctions that were initiated by the United States and by the EU that are having the greatest effect on inflation. The military aspect of this combined war itself is probably not the main factor in causing the inflation we see from the war. So what I'm saying is, I don't like the sole blame here being placed, okay, on Putin. While there is no mention, okay, of any part of the blame for what we are experiencing actually being placed on the United States, the economic sanctions have been stupid, and their continuation, okay, is stupid. It's having devastating effects over in Europe. It is terrible, terrible policy, and also unnecessary. And if you happen to think that the war started when Putin invaded on February 24th, you're mistaken. This war started when we stood behind and supported a coup against a legally elected regime in Ukraine in 2014. And then the coup government turned around and started a civil war against the Russian-speaking inhabitants of the Ukraine. Now, all this is well known. We don't see it in our media, in our press, which has largely hidden the reality of what has happened. But if you think there was no civil war inside of Ukraine starting in 2014, then I have to ask you, what is it when fighting breaks out between two parts of a country and over 8 years, 14,000 people, okay, are killed? But to me, that's a pretty good definition of a civil war. Anyway, going on. The shortages are coming just at a time when consumer demand is soaring in the wake of what is hopefully the end of the worst of COVID. Yeah, we all hope it's the end of the worst of COVID. But it's not the end of COVID, as some people have been stating. Inflation in the United States is also being caused by corporations raising their prices faster than their costs to fatten their profit margins. That is known as price gouging, folks. And it was estimated by the Economic Policy Institute, Josh Bivens and his collaborators, actually, that 53% of the inflation is due to price gouging. This is now becoming fairly public knowledge. It was determined about a month and a half ago, but it's now becoming very public because Katie Porter drew attention to it in Congress, I guess 3 or 4 days ago, with a nice chart. The evidence of this is now all around us. Corporate profit margins are at record highs, says Bob Reich. Quote, the companies who set prices are really reluctant to stop increasing them, says Gianna Smialek, who writes about the Fed for the New York Times. What we saw was that corporations were actually pocketing quite a bit more profit off this. They're still putting up prices very rapidly, even in instances where their own costs are starting to fall. Now, What is behind this? Well, number one, if their own costs are starting to fall and they're still raising prices very rapidly, then that is, of course, price gouging, taking advantage of the situation to increase their profits. And that price gouging is due to the corporations themselves and also to a reluctance of the Democratic administration to control what the corporations are doing. There has been no effort to have a windfall profits tax. Corporate profits continue to climb even as consumers are taking it on the chin. It's a giant redistribution from consumers to corporations. It is. This would seem to be a natural issue for Democrats to be sounding off about. The Fed rate hikes aren't working because they're based on the anachronistic idea that slowing consumer demand automatically causes prices to fall or to climb more slowly. But with global shortages of supplies and monopolistic corporations raising prices to preserve or enlarge their profits, the Fed would have to raise interest rates far higher before having a desired effect. The Fed would very likely bring the economy to a crawl, by which time the human cost will be overwhelming. And I must comment on that in the inflation that started in Jimmy Carter's time and that ended, in the Reagan administration in 1983 or 1984, before the Fed could raise interest rates so high that it had a measurable impact on things, uh, they had to raise those interest rates, the overnight rate, to something like 21%. Okay, 21%. And I have to add that now the structure of the economy is such that the corporations have even more power than they had then to continue to raise prices. Now, it's true, labor has less power, uh, at this time. So wages, are less of a factor in causing inflation. At this point, in fact, wages are going up at a slower rate than prices. At this point, so clearly they are not contributing very much to the price rises. In fact, in the EPI estimate, uh, it was estimated that wage increases accounted for only 8% of the inflation, as opposed to 53% for the price aspect. Anyway, Reich wants to know, why aren't Biden and the Democrats hammering away with this message? 9 months ago, the White House's National Economics Council was putting out research papers on the relationship between corporate power and inflation, but then abruptly stopped. The reason was conventional economists claimed the theory didn't hold water, even though the data showed that it did. They argued that the monopolistic corporations would have exercised their pricing power all along, not just during this burst of inflation. That conventional view, says Bob Reich, is being proven wrong. Corporations have been more willing to exercise monopoly power over the past year because inflation has given them cover to do so, while telling retailers and consumers they have no choice but to raise prices because their own costs are rising. They've been raising prices higher than their rising costs in order to expand their profit margin. There's another reason the White House stopped trying to blame inflation on big corporations. That is, that the corporate funders of Democrats have made it clear they don't want the White House or Democratic candidates to blame this inflation on them. That's a pity, says Bob Reich. Until Democrats tell it like it is and talk accurately and clearly about such abuses of corporate power, their electoral majorities will continue to be fragile, and they'll never get the political mandate they need to take on corporate power as directly and forcefully as it must be taken on. And in 2 weeks, they may lose control over Congress. Yep. I largely agree with that analysis, except in the places where I commented and I disagreed. Okay, I would only say that there's considerable sentiment now inside the Democratic Party to change tactics and to begin finally to talk about inflation being the fault of corporations that are making more money than ever during this period of time. So let's now go to a second article by Bob Reich, which is even more explicit about this. And let me bring that up. So that article was in LA Progressive. Its title is Why Democrats Don't Blame Corporations for Inflation. So this was on October 19th. Despite the Federal Reserve's most aggressive campaign in generations to slow the economy and bring price increases under control, prices continue to climb at a brutally rapid pace in September, with a key inflation index increasing at the fastest rate in 40 years. Even though the Fed has quickly raised interest rates from near zero to a range of 3 to 3.25%, overall inflation, 8.2% over the year through September, continues to roar. Worse, it's headed in the wrong direction. Well, Stephanie and Chase Manhattan Bank think that it's now going in the right direction. After stripping out the volatile fuel and food, inflation increased. No wonder investors expect the Fed to announce another rate increase at the end of its next meeting on November 2nd. All this could have severe political consequences for Democrats. In the midterm elections 3 weeks from today. Republicans are focusing on inflation because voters see it as their biggest immediate problem. And it's easy to blame on the Democrats because they're in charge. Biden and Democrats have provided no retort except to talk about their efforts to reduce drug prices. Why are Democrats so reluctant to blame inflation on one of its major causes? Corporations raising their prices faster than their costs in order to fatten their profit margins. The evidence of this is now all around us. The companies who set prices are really reluctant to stop increasing them. And Giannis Mialik is again quoted here. What we saw was that corporations were actually pocketing quite a bit more profit off this. They're still putting up their prices very rapidly. even in instances where their own costs are starting to fall. So as a result, corporate profits continue to climb, even as consumers are taking it on the chin. It's a giant redistribution from consumers to corporations. So Bob Rice says, better to wait out the global supply shocks and deal with corporate power with a temporary windfall profits tax and more vigorous antitrust enforcement. Would this truthful message be helpful to the Democrats? I defer to my favorite and most accurate pollster, Stan Greenberg, who did a large survey last month of more than 2,000 registered voters. Greenberg found that the following statement had the biggest impact on moving voters towards the Democrats. Corporate profits are at a 70-year high, yet corporations are raising their prices. They are not raising their prices because of their increasing costs. They're using the cover of inflation to increase their profits. They're doing so because they face little competition. But most American workers haven't seen a real wage increase in 40 years. Income and wealth are being distributed up to CEOs and shareholders, while working people are living paycheck to paycheck. And the CEOs are now paying a lower tax rate than working people. Republican leaders in Congress won't stop price gouging and letting working people pay higher taxes. Democrats say enough. They are cutting taxes. They are cutting taxes for working people and raising them on big corporations and billionaires. And they are fighting against unlimited secret campaign funds. So that was a statement that was in Stan Greenberg's survey. I've just quoted that statement. Stan Greenberg believes this is a winning message for Democrats. Hitting big corporations and Republicans on price increases wins them a large portion of voters under 50 and the working class overall. So why aren't Biden and the Democrats hammering away with this message? I've wondered the same thing. 9 months ago, the White House's National Economics Council was putting out research papers on the relationship between corporate power and inflation, but then abruptly stopped. At the time, I suspected this was because more conventional economists from the Obama administration, such as Larry Summers and Jason Furman, were claiming the theory didn't hold water because monopolistic corporations would have exercised their pricing power all along, not just during this burst of inflation. After speaking to several insiders, both in the White House and in Congress, I believe I found the real reason, and it's more troubling. To put it bluntly, corporate funders of Democrats have made it clear they don't want the White House or the party to blame this inflation on them. That's a pity, because until the Democrats tell it like it is and talk accurately and clearly about such abuses of corporate power, their electoral majorities will continue to be fragile, and they'll never get the political mandate they need to take on corporate power as directly and forcefully as it must be taken on. So those two articles give the same message. It's necessary for the Democrats to say to their corporations, if they have to say anything, that, look, we're sorry, but you are to blame for the inflation, and we're not going to win this election, okay, if we don't say so. Okay, it's not going to do any good, okay, if you give us money after the elections. We need to win right now. And you giving us money after the elections is not going to help us right now. So we're very sorry, but we're going to have to tell the truth about this in the last weeks of this campaign. And if the public starts to blame you for that, it's just too bad. That's the truth. You are to blame for the inflation. And the public is going to hear that truth now from us for the last 2 weeks. And hopefully that message will be sent in time to stop the slide in electoral support that we're getting now because we tried to protect you. So sorry, folks, but no more protection from us in these last few weeks. The public is going to get this message, and it's going to get it right now. I hope the Democrats are sending that message to the corporations and are sending the truth to the voters before it's too late. Before it is too late. I'm now going to look at some of your comments. Hi, Amber. Hi, Steve Day. Hi, Dolores. Hi, Kay. Garstad says, Mushroom Cloud says, vote blue no matter who. Yeah, the vote blue no matter who is, okay, it's definitely a problem. I have to say that I'm of the opinion that I don't think that we're going to get a mushroom cloud. I think that in the end, Biden is going to step away and is going to change the foreign policies he's been following. And first of all, I think we're soon going to see a collapse of many of the governments over in Europe that have been supporting the United States in this. So I think the campaign in Europe is going to break down, and Russian oil is again going to start to flow to Europe. That's going to ease the crisis. So I think the sanctions more generally are going to fail. Oh, thank you, Sandy. Hey, I'm sorry you had to run off to the doctor. Okay, I also think that most probably the Ukraine war is going to accelerate in its pace. Okay, I think the Russians are going to win, a military victory. And with the increasing unpopularity of the war in Europe among the peoples of most of the nations of Europe, that will mean that NATO will not be in any position to continue its efforts to prop up the regime in Ukraine. Okay, if that happens, I don't think the United States is going to be able to put together a coalition to continue to support that particular regime. I also think that that idea of no longer supporting a very undemocratic regime, okay, in Ukraine is going to become a lot more popular here in the United States. So I think domestic support for the war is going to be getting weaker and weaker over the next 2 or 3 months. And I don't think that our government will be able to continue to avoid sitting down and talking to the Russians and making an end, okay, of all this. Inflation, Putin, Nancy Pelosi say, quote, change the subject, unquote. I don't think that's going to work over the next 2 weeks or so. That was Ghost Start, by the way, who made those comments. Steve Ghost Start. And Kay says Garland is speaking on China. You mean Attorney General Garland is speaking on China. And Ghost Start says, Joe Daddy says, quote, I did that. Steve Day says, federal taxes pay for nothing. And part wars suck. Steve Day says, good, 2 weeks to correct tons of misinformation. Actually, it may not be that hard because there is a strong tendency among the public to blame the corporations, okay, for what's been happening. And I don't think the Republicans have been making the argument that it's not due to the corporations. Okay, what the Republicans have been doing is saying, hey, we have inflation, okay, and the Democrats are to blame because it's under them, and the Democrats just haven't been answering. In other words, they've been silent on the subject. If they now start to reply and vigorously blame it on the Republicans, as some are starting to do, then I think that point of view can easily turn around because the ground has been long seated in favor of the view that it's the corporation's fault. Steve Day says hope is not a plan. Well, if you're talking about, changing things over the next um, 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 2 weeks, the plan is for everybody to start to blame that on the Republicans. Of course, there's no one to guarantee that's going to be successful. But I think the Democrats have been greatly slipping in the polls. They have to do something about it. I also think the polls are very dicey this time. And the reasons why they're very dicey is I don't believe the polling has been taking into account the great increases in registration from women, okay, who are independent, who are not members of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. There's been a very heavy increase in registration on their part. We see that in Georgia. We also see a great increase in registration among blacks in Georgia. So the registrations in Georgia mean that close to as many people will vote this time in Georgia as they did for the presidential election 2 years ago. That's a very good sign for Democrats, and that has not been tracked in the polls. Because to track it in the polls, what you do is you have to change the sample. They weren't changing the samples to take this into account. And the poll numbers, now the numbers of people participating in the polls were also very low. The New York Times Siena poll, which is generally a very well accepted poll, is one of the more accurate polls. I think they screwed up a week ago because what they did is, first of all, they had only 792 people, okay, in the poll. That's a little thin for a national poll where you want to do crosstabs. That is number one. But number two, they had a very, very suspicious shift in that poll between um, some attitudes that were measured in September and the attitudes that were measured in October. Specifically, okay, in a critical question, there was a difference in the responses between September and October of 32 points. In September, the Democrats were ahead on a particular issue by 14 points. And in the October poll, they were behind by 18 points. Now, there was nothing to account for that kind of shift. In other words, nothing special happened to account for such a very large shift. I mean, okay, if the result had been one where opinions had shifted 5 points or 6 points or 7 points, that would be believable. But 32 points? No, that's a polling error. Ghostat says, I gladly codify Roe v. Wade tomorrow for a vote today. Nothing burger. Yeah, that's a nothing burger. That's a very good point. Steve, they still have the majority. Why don't they codify it today? That would lock in a victory if they do that. Steve Day says, blue hoo-ha. Lana says, shared. Kay says, I got to go now. Thank you, Joe. Steve Day says, thank you for coming, Kay. And Steve Day says, federal taxes, including FICA, pay for nothing. Party wars suck. I entirely agree, Steve Day. Lana says, as far as we know, is Russia losing the war? We keep hearing that. Not sure. I don't buy it at all. I don't buy it at all. I mean, I think Russia is clearly winning the war. And I think over the next 4 weeks, it's going to be clear to everyone that is happening. It's already starting to happen. We're already beginning to see counterattacks from the Russians. Ghostart says, my sis who works for a major bank told me they're pulling out of several countries, but was uncomfortable disclosing which ones before it's public. But care to wage a guess? And Lana Dell says, yes, I think Attorney Garland. Ghostut says, Tim Ryan is a Trump Democrat. I wouldn't say that. I mean, I agree Tim Ryan is very centrist, okay, on many things. But the bottom line is that he's really pro-labor. He's very conservative on social issues. That's true. But on economic issues, he's different. So I don't think he's a Trump Democrat. And in any case, he's not as much of a Trump Democrat as J.D. Vance is. Steve Day says pollsters polled by dial-up landline phones. Laugh out loud. That too, Steve Day. And Steve Day says Joe and Bonnie's trekking poles. Yeah, Nordic walking sticks, I see. Okay, are the best. Thanks. And Ghostart says NAFO is QAnon for poo. Now, the NAFO is a trolling group. I haven't covered them here yet. I don't know if I will. I've been thinking about it, but I'm not sure it's so critical as covering other things. Anyway, folks, thank you for coming. I'll be seeing you later tonight. I'll be back at 9 p.m. But now I have to go clean up, and we have to do some shopping today. So thank you for coming, everyone. And I hope I'll see you in greater numbers and in spades for the 9 o'clock show. What am I going to do for the 9 o'clock show? I actually figured that out. So, on very key issues, Kevin McCarthy, is lying. Oh, by the way, Joe Biden's lying too on a particular key issue. I don't know if he's lying, but I'll say this. But Democrats, very recently, in order to strengthen the cause of Democrats this time around, Joe Biden came forth with a pledge. He said that if you give me majorities of Democrats in both houses, then the first thing I'm going to do is codify Roe v. Wade. Now, against that statement, we have a number of others. First, we have Obama's promise in the 2008 campaign that he was going to do that first thing. As soon as he got into office, I have higher priorities than that. Biden, as we all know, was part of that administration. He was part of the experience where Obama got away with that. He got away with that clean. So Biden saw Obama do that and get away with it. More generally, he is not known for his honesty. He promised in January $2,000 checks to people. As you know, he reneged on that. He sent out only $1,400 checks, saying that, people had already got $600 checks from Trump. So 600 plus 1,400 is 2,000. Well, his promise to deliver 2,000 was after the Trump administration was sending out those $600 checks. So Biden broke that promise. There was a platform promise by the Democrats to pass the $15 an hour minimum wage. In the American Rescue Plan, Joe Biden, first of all, said he had to respect the parliamentarian. We all know how ridiculous that was. That was just a broken promise. He did not support the Fight for 15 in the American Rescue Plan. He ran away from it. He broke another promise. He can talk about the parliamentarian all he wants, but Chuck Schumer was in position to fire the parliamentarian on the spot. That's what the Republicans did in a similar situation themselves in 2002. Exactly similar situation. The parliamentarian came up with the wrong decision. They fired him, and they did what they wanted anyway. What the parliamentarian says, okay, is not binding. Biden's people in the Senate went over to the other side and voted against the Bernie Sanders amendment to add $15 an hour back into the American Rescue Plan after Chuck Schumer had written it out in the Senate after it passed the House, okay, of Representatives. So those were two broken promises of Biden. He also promised that in the Build Back Better bill, that both what the progressives wanted and what the conservatives wanted would pass. He reneged on that. He caved in to Joe Manchin. Throughout his political career, Joe Biden has broken promises. He has a terrible record when it comes to keeping promises. The justifiable question to him now is, why ought we to believe you now, Joe? You don't keep your commitments. I would love to have someone ask him that question. And I would love to see how he answers it. What's he going to say? Cross my heart and hope to die? Okay, guys, I have to say that. I'll see you later. Steve Day says hashtag understand MMT. Steve Day says polls. And Dolores says thank you and see you later. Okay, I am leaving right now. Thank you for the comments and discussion.